Well, I would say not just the Destination Venezuela exhibition as far as my work is concerned, but the whole event itself, the way it kind of came together was very sort of organic, and it came through being involved with Vicksburg and the residencies and the artists that were coming here. We sort of talked to Sid Bastos, who was running the Cultural Arts Center, and the idea of doing the Destination Venezuela show event came up. And so we sort of worked on that since the end of last year. Huge migration. I mean, I don't know if it's comes after the Syrian migration, but they calculate it's something like 5 million people who've left. And, you know, we were the lucky ones that were able to go abroad with, you know, a job to go to, and legally with the proper visa requirements. But the people who've been leaving over the last 2 or 3 years have had to leave on foot. I mean, literally with what they had on their backs, carrying children, and that's a migration that is incredibly, you know, harassing and sort of long. And they walk through Colombia and down to the other Andean countries, sort of looking for work and refuge. The ones that arrived last are losing the work that they had, so they're having to walk back again. That's why we called it the long walk and back in the end. So since we were looking at all this material and looking at the photographs, it sort of sparked off a whole new series of work about that issue. And that's what's on show at the Cultural Arts Center, and I've continued working on that since the beginning of this year, really. I mean, it just brings up these really surreal images, you know, of people walking across a river carrying their furniture. And also they're scenes and people and places that I know and can identify with. It really is just kind of like a long road and a procession of figures that are walking down it. And this is taken from a 15th century mappa mundi, but an Aztec one. But I've always been interested in those old maps and representations of landscapes. But it was really just this kind of feeling of a never-ending kind of road to track down. These are sort of abstracted views of Caracas, sort of looking down through the buildings, these interstices, other undesigned views through the cracks, which is also often the way that we view the shanty towns. They're always sort of views between buildings or sort of in the distance on the hillside. And in a way, people kind of block that view out, they don't quite see it. So that's another kind of theme, the looking through the cracks, looking behind, looking at a distance, also a distance that's very real from between here and Venezuela. It's literally my cutouts, the symbols. I also have them cut out in rubber. It's a material that I've worked with a lot in my studio in Caracas, in the terrace. They're all just sort of mounted up there, kind of semi-abandoned, and it's just that feeling of all the things that have been left behind and are gradually getting buried. This one is kind of about the weight of things that people are carrying, because everything is just what people can carry on their backs. So you see people walking with suitcases, carrying children. This is about a border crossing and bridges. So they're kind of larger themes that come out of looking at these issues. So borders and boundaries and limitations and the kind of signage that we use for that has always been something that's fascinated me, particularly in relation to urban landscapes. And then also to the body itself. So you can kind of go backwards and forwards between the built environment as an expression of our own kind of humanity and our way of being in the world, and then also how that sort of reflects back on the body. The bridge is a kind of a metaphor for a lot of things. This is the sketch for it, and built up with these symbols and figures. So it's also about human endeavour, which in the end is, it's kind of what fascinates me, I suppose, about everything that we do and build and construct. We came to Kalamazoo because of my husband's research. He's an astrophysicist, and he's been working at Western Michigan University. So we've been really grateful to have that opportunity to, you know, live somewhere where you know, the circumstances aren't just so dire that you're sort of scrambling. You know, everyday survival is just immensely complicated, and it's just getting more and more so by the day in Venezuela, with even the most basic services becoming more and more limited. Electricity is a big issue as well, communications of all kinds, any sorts of productive activity, agriculture. So yeah, it was a big relief to be here and to really just be able to concentrate on our work. The 40 years of democracy previous to the revolution were perfect. There was a lot of issues with corruption. This is an oil-producing country. There was an enormous amount of wealth in the second half of the last century. But it was also a really interesting place to be. I went there at the beginning of the 80s, and I think it was, I describe it to people sometimes as an incipient welfare state at the end of the 60s at least. They still have free education, really good universities that are struggling to, you know, to keep teaching and graduating their students so that they can then go abroad to do postdoctoral studies. And I went to live in the interior of Venezuela on the confluence of the Orinoco and Caroni rivers, where there is an industrial city that was part of the development to diversify from oil. I mean, it was to supply, you know, basic piping and stuff like that from the steel industry for the oil industry, but it was also about diversifying from that. In the 80s, you know, there was state-sponsored cultural activities, which was the reason why we went there. And I didn't feel isolated. You know, coming from a city like London, we had this fantastic job there to run the cultural activities of one of the industries. And as an artist, we had opportunities to exhibit, to show. We had the doors of the museums open to us. So in a way, that really makes you stretch and grow as an artist, rather than having to think about just participating in a sort of more commercial gallery circuit, if you like. So yeah, it was an interesting place to grow up as an artist.